Welcome to another episode of Witty CFB. Your host, Rob Sheply here. And on today's episode, we have Craig McMichael joining us, contributor for Last Word on Sports, covers all things SEC football, Georgia football, and even a little bit of lacrosse for you lacrosse fans out there. Craig, it's great to have you on. I appreciate being generous your time. And, I told you about this off camera too, and I want to let the audience know too. I've been following your work for a while now and really appreciate being generous your time and, sharing your insights on the game with all of us here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rob. No, I really appreciate it. I'm a northerner who in college went down to Atlanta, was at Georgia State University, and fell in love with like SEC football and Georgia football, and am just a big fan of the college game. I like to joke that I only care about Saturdays. I don't worry about Sundays in the NFL. Like that is where my focus is. And for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been doing some writing. Last 3 with Last Word, and to me, it's like I just want to have fun and be a little punchy. If I can take a shot at Billy Napier and the Gators, I will do so. If I can take a shot at whatever LSU's doing and whoever they're going to be hiring, I'll do that. But I've covered the Dogs for like I said, the last 3 years, and it's been a really fun season. And then for the last 2 years, my buddy Rob Williams and I have had our own podcast, and I should say show now because I guess we can't say podcast because I sound old. I sound like Mike Gundy or something like that. But we have a show called SEC Sunday Nights. It comes on the Chief Sports Network. It's simulcast YouTube and Twitter and stuff like that. But we cover the SEC as a whole. We believe it is the best conference. It doesn't always show up on the field, but it definitely has a number of storylines. So looking forward to chatting with you and talking with you tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you sharing everything, and we're going to put all your credentials in the description of the video too for everyone who wants to check out Craig and his work. But your introduction leads to a great segment here talking about Georgia versus Georgia Tech. The first time I think about decades since it's going to be a ranked matchup, and obviously Georgia Tech is coming off a little bit of a cold streak here to the last couple of games between whether it was NC State or Pittsburgh or even Boston College, who's 1-10 now. They've given up over 41 points a game, and now they're going to have a neutral site game at Mercedes-Benz Stadium off a red-hot Georgia team, which, coincidentally was my pick in the preseason to win the national championship. So, we'll see how that prediction goes. But, Craig, when you look at this matchup and you look at this Georgia team and just how strong they've been and how consistent they've been, what's your overall thoughts on the game itself, and what are your keys to victory for Georgia here?
Sure. So first and foremost, I'm frustrated that it's at Mercedes-Benz. I am not a neutral site guy. It's the same thing with like the world's largest cocktail party. Like that should not be in Jacksonville. That should be in the swamp. That should be between the hedges. The fact that Georgia Tech has a great stadium right in downtown Atlanta at Bobby Dodd, and they move it to a boring NFL stadium that is Mercedes-Benz. Now Mercedes-Benz is a great venue. I've been to SEC championships there, but to me, you lose that home field advantage there. And you know what? This is clean, old-fashioned hate. These two teams do not like each other. There was a great conversation I was listening to earlier today, and they're like, do Georgia Tech fans grow up being Georgia fans? Not really. Like these folks want to go to Georgia Tech. There's not a lot of love lost there, and I think we can think about George Pickens and those Georgia Tech cornerbacks from a few years ago. These teams do not like each other, and like you said, Georgia Tech scares the hell out of me. I mean, we went to 8 overtimes last year in Athens. I was on the edge of my seat. I remember like having to do the recap of that game, and I didn't write a damn thing until that game was over. And then like when it was over, I'm like, okay, what do I write about now? Georgia Tech defense has been in question. I think that NC State game exposed something there because they've had problems against Boston College. They had problems against Pittsburgh. But, despite all of their defensive challenges, I'm a big fan of Haynes King and an even bigger fan of Buster Faulkner. I will talk about Georgia here in a second, but Mike Bobo really kind of failed to live up to a little bit of that standard and really failed to live up to a little bit of that dynamic offense, after he took over from Todd Monken. And I'll be honest, I was writing it. I was calling for it. I was like, Buster Faulkner was a GA. Or no, I'm sorry, he was a analyst right along with Monken. What Faulkner does with the RPO, I think, is probably one of the most dynamic pieces. He has Haynes King, who can do it on the ground. He can do it through the air, and continues to move the ball. I think he's one of the best offenses. Everyone's like, oh, it's going to be no problem. I think there's a 6.5, 9.5 point spread, whatever it may be. But I'll be honest, I'm going to be expecting a 4-quarter game. This Georgia Bulldog team is coming in 11-1. They were 7-1 in the SEC, and it was different though. It's not your 2021, not your 2022 Bulldogs who could just manhandle people. They had to fight, and they had, I think one of the things you look at is they had to come back a lot. There was a lot of second half comebacks, a lot of fourth quarter comebacks. My good friend John Smith of John Tweet Sports likes to talk about the Georgia Death March that Georgia has been primed for, where there's that key drive late in the third or late in the fourth quarter where Georgia needs a 5-6 minute drive, and they're going to put the nail in the coffin, and they've been able to do that. So to me, it's going to be like, that Georgia offense. It's led by Gunnar Stockton, probably one of the most dynamic quarterbacks, but doesn't get a whole lot of love. I know we're going to talk about the Heisman in a minute. Going into the season, we had a lot of love for Lagway, Manning, Nussmeier. Those guys have gone to the side. Gunnar is still continuing to make big plays. He showed it in Knoxville, in Tennessee. He's been almost perfect in all of these second half games against these top rated teams, but he's done really well. He's also been helped by the fact that, I'll give Mike Bobo a shot. I was pretty hard on him here just a few minutes ago, but Bobo's done a really good job. I wrote an article in the offseason just called "Run the Damn Ball, Bobo." It's like because Georgia had lost their identity as a running team, and this year with Nate Bowens and Chauncey Bowens, they have a really good 1-2 combination. That old school Georgia attack has really come back. If you're looking at the biggest question mark, and this is where I get worried about Haynes King and Buster Faulkner, it's the Georgia defense. They're good, but they're not great. They're not going to be pushing on people. They've had problems getting off the ball on third down. They've been able to make some adjustments. They did a great job shutting down like Ole Miss in the second half, but Alabama was like 9 of 12 on third down. So you look at that as a problematic piece where that defense doesn't have any of those big stars. C.J. Allen is still probably going to be out next week, their linebacker. So, you look at the challenges. So if, I've been rambling a lot, I apologize, but as I look at it as a whole, this game is going to be a 4-quarter game. Now, Georgia has looked the part finally. Look at what they did a couple weeks ago when they went to Starkville and they basically stomped Mississippi State. Exactly. That, to me, I thought was going to be a challenge. That showed that this team has grown up. I think Georgia Tech, though, is going to be ready for this game. And to me, I expect a 4-quarter game. I expect Georgia Tech to be up 14-3, something early, and Georgia, again, having to come back and bringing on that death march in the fourth quarter to come out with the win.
Yeah, because you brought up a lot of great points there, right? And, you made a couple allusions to it, kind of the dominant 2024 team in the sense that exactly what you mentioned. It's not the teams of the past where, you had a super dominant offense and in terms of the rushing attack and the defense was able to kind of carry you. And then that Mississippi State game, at least for me, that was the game where I kind of said to myself, hey, Georgia is legit national contender. Not that they never weren't, but that was the game I needed to see where it just felt like a full, complete victory, if that makes sense too. And I guess to touch on Georgia Tech a little bit too, you can never count out Haynes King. He's a baller. He's just somebody who's fun to watch. But I think as time has kind of shown, he's just, after taking so many hits over the season and playing against some really tough defenses like the Pittsburghs of the world and what have you too, it just adds up. And I guess that's my kind of question mark for the Georgia Tech team. Is the one thing I love about watching Georgia Tech is no matter who they're playing, no matter what defense it is, they're going to run it down your throat. They're going to run it down the middle, and they're going to say it. And they're going to say, okay, you want to beat us? Okay, stack 7-8 in the box, and let's see who's going to play harder. So you have that aspect of it too. And then, Georgia too. I mean, they've had, I would say the receiver room has been definitely better for him this year too. And, Gunnar Stockton's really, kind of came into his own because I think at the beginning of the season, I don't think anyone really, I don't want to say doubt because I think what we saw from the SEC championship game, I think people definitely knew hey, it was a testament to him too, especially when Kirby didn't go after a transfer quarterback too and said, hey, Stockton's our guy. We don't need anyone else. So between all of that and most importantly, just as you alluded to a couple seconds ago, it's the adjustments that Kirby Smart and Mike Bobo and Glenn Schumann and this entire staff were able to make. And that's just a testament to Kirby Smart being one of the best coaches in all of college football, if not the best.
Yeah, and you look at it, there were a lot of questions coming from Gunner. Sure, he was able to take Georgia, give him a little bit of a spark in the SEC championship game, and then Carson came in with the handoff in overtime to be able to win it. But he didn't look great in the Notre Dame game in the Cotton Bowl. I'm sorry, the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah.
That game was kind of weird with everything that was going on in New Orleans, around that time. But he did not look great. He did not look dynamic. So I think there were some questions there. But I think what you're seeing out of Gunner Stockton are the intangibles that Georgia never had with Carson Beck. Anyone who's listened to my show knows that I am not a Carson Beck fan. He can have his Lambos and his Ferraris. I'm going to take Gunner Stockton's 1983 Brown F-150, because I think that is the attitude and that's the mentality. Like you see it with his players. But I think like if you're looking at like that receiver room, the tight end really like went away from Georgia last year. They were there, but they were never really utilized. Gunner Stockton's roommate is Oscar Delp, and Delp was a good player. Never, I think, the elite. He's not going to be Brock Bowers. He's not Darnell Washington, but he's a guy. He can put his hand in the ground. He can go up and make some passes. And you see that relationship and you see that energy with Gunner Stockton. Delp is having a great year. Georgia did a great job of going into the transfer portal. They've really revamped their receiver room. Zachariah Branch has been electric. He is that go-to guy for Georgia when they need somebody. They can throw that. Colby Young, who was transferred in last year from Miami, was sort of their big play receiver. He went out earlier in the year with a leg injury. Noah Thomas, who came in from Texas A&M, has stepped up. Landon Humphreys always seems to make that big catch, whether it's a touchdown like he had against Texas, or some of those big catches. But again, it goes back to Gunner Stockton, and it's those intangibles. It's not always the prettiest, but he can use his legs, he uses mobility, but the guys love him, and you can really tell. And I think that's what's really pulling him up there. It gives you some of those Stetson Bennett feels.
Yeah, and even when you go back, like, I'm going back, a couple years, but even when I think of other Georgia quarterbacks, I think of Aaron Murray, for example, and, he wasn't a guy that necessarily you look at him on film and you say to yourself, like, hey, he's a guy that's going to throw fire. Like, he's not anything like that. He's a solid decision maker. He's a leader. And most importantly, I think Gunner Stockton fits better schematically in terms of what Mike Bobo is trying to do instead of Carson Beck. Because I think deep down, when you're watching Carson Beck last year, he wants to be in that spread kind of offense where if it was up to him, he'd be throwing every damn play. Yep. Where in reality, when you have a guy like Frazier and other in that running back room where you have a legit 1-2 punch, it's just not necessary for him to be doing all that. So I think it's just like you said too, when you have all those weapons of the Zachariah Branch of the world, the Kobe Youngs of the world, it's a testament to what Georgia has done, not only recruiting, but also just being very calculated in terms of the transfer portal. Whereas you see a lot about other SEC teams like the Ole Misses of the world, for example, they're just going in, getting a bunch of juniors and seniors and hoping it works out. Obviously, I'm very generalizing here, but you get the point of you picking up what I'm putting down.
Yeah, and that was the biggest question, I think. Smart has used a lot of the wide receiver room. Georgia is blessed in a way that they're able to recruit at a high level. Smart is always in the top 3. They're 1, 2, or 3, almost year in and year out. And sometimes, like as a Georgia writer, for being a little bit critical, why aren't more of those receivers kind of really working out and putting it together? Why do you have to go to the transfer portal? But I think it's just part of college football now. Like, in order to be successful, you have to be able to recruit, but you also have to be able to evaluate talent and utilize the transfer portal. I think, if you look at Ole Miss, probably weighing on Lane Kiffin. Like, he is very good at evaluating talent. He can bring in a lot of talent. Chambliss is fantastic. He's from up in my neck of the woods in Michigan. Played at Ferris State, won a national championship up in northern Michigan, and then comes down. Spurrier found him, on a whim. But, if you go to a place like LSU, you can still take that transfer portal talent, but then you can also take, those guys that are in your backyard, and you sort of leverage it to make it work. And, you look across the SEC, those guys who got fired, whether it's Napier, whether it's Brian Kelly, whether it's Sam Pittman, they were either slow to adapt or slow to embrace NIL, and they're slow to embrace the transfer portal. And I think that, and I think that's why we've seen so much of that churn in the way that we have in 2025.
Yeah, exactly. You brought up some great points there to put that together. And we just talked about Ole Miss a couple seconds ago, and this wasn't the direction I was going in, but I'm going to throw a hypothetical out there for you since you cover the SEC too.
Sure.
Presumably, let's just say, for argument's sake, let's just say it's Georgia and Texas A&M in the SEC championship game. Let's just say they get past that and they get in, and let's just say for this example that Georgia, A&M, Alabama, and Ole Miss, let's say those 4 teams get in, and you're going through the college football playoff, and Georgia perhaps has to face an SEC team again within the playoff. Out of those 3 teams that I mentioned, which team would you be most afraid to face in terms of a matchup on if let's just say if Georgia was on the road, for example, but you can however you want to dice it, but it was just a hypothetical I thought of.
Yeah, Alabama. It's always Alabama because, sure, that's who we beat, and that was so sweet when we were able to beat them in the national championship. But let's be honest, Alabama has some voodoo on Georgia. It's close. Last year's game was so frustrating in Tuscaloosa. I was saying some very, very bad words in the first half when we were down 30-7. And then everyone was excited. Georgia comes back within like a score before Beck throws the interception. And it's well, it shouldn't have been that way in the first place. I just don't like it. Does that mean that I'm scared of Alabama or that Georgia can't beat Alabama? No. But those are those intangibles. Ole Miss is interesting. I think Lane and Spurrier do a fantastic job. I mean, they scored in the first 5 drives against Georgia. They were just it was a fun game this year in Athens. It was a scoring fest going back and forth, and then Georgia's defense finally put on the brakes, got a couple of stops to be able to turn that game. The biggest question I had, and we talked about this on the show on Sunday night. I have a lot of questions about Texas A&M. They're great, number 3, but I call their defense, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I've seen that defense look horrendous against South Carolina in the first half, shut them out in the second half. I've seen that, the high-scoring game against Notre Dame. I saw them shut out Auburn, in College Station. I don't know what we're getting. Offensively, Texas A&M is very good. Marcel Reed is good. They've got a really good running backfield, but that defense scares me. I'm not really sure about that. And then you look at Oklahoma, who I think is going to be the 5th SEC team in. Sorry, Big Ten. Sorry, ACC and Big 12, but I think we're getting 5 in this year. Oklahoma, killer defense, really great run defense, but I don't hear as much about Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer anymore. That was all of the rage back in September and early October about how great this offense was, and this offense is struggling to score 200, put up 200 yards. So, if I'm going to say it, Georgia, I'm worried about. Alabama, Ohio State's very good. Oregon's pretty good. Texas Tech is okay, but again, with the way they're playing with confidence, and I think that they could go blow for blow with almost all those teams.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because I only mentioned the hypothetical because at least for me, Georgia, besides Georgia Alabama game, the Georgia and Ole Miss game, that was one of my favorite games I've watched this year because I just remember kind of thinking to myself hey, if Ole Miss can figure this out again, man, would that definitely turn some heads. Not discrediting Ole Miss here, but you get what I mean in the sense that hey, maybe that voice in Lane Kiffin's head maybe wants him to stay in Oxford a little bit harder. We're not going to get into that, but